Greetings everybody, I'm the Spirit Guy and welcome to Spirit Guy Ed, where hopefully today I can be your spirit guide, give you food for thought, answer some unfulfilled questions, further your understandings or inspire you. And welcome to part 2 of this video series on what is God. As I said at the end of the last video, this is the topic we will be covering today, how mind or emptiness or pure nothingness or pure potentiality stirs or awakens from complete inertia to an active state. Or how mind goes from potentiality to possibility, which is part of the process of thought, which is the process of creation that we will be going through here today. And like I warned you in the last video, this series of videos explaining God are probably on the dry side for some people. It's a sciencey philosophy-esque explanation of God and how God works and functions and all its important parts. And if you thought the last video was too technical or complicated, well, this video is another level above that. You do need to watch the previous video and get those baseline concepts down pat in order to keep up and understand the content in this video. Definitions and concepts are vital to understanding these videos, this one especially. This video has a lot more text on screen there to help you follow along with these more complex concepts. Should save you some time from going back and forth and re-watching or rehearing what I just said if or when you're struggling to understand something. Also, more definitions are highlighted in this video than the last one. They'll be on screen in boxes there if you need them or are further interested. If not, then just ignore almost all text surrounded by a box. But I won't be going through each of the semantics. I think if I do that, I can too easily distract from the complex concepts I'm trying to explain here. And just like the last video, as we go along, I'm going to try to be as step by step as possible. And so I will be repeating words and concepts as often as I need to in order to bring about the understanding of newly presented concepts and how they all relate and fit together. So some people might be like, you could have done that faster, but others are not so quick to grasp these concepts, and I'm trying to cater to as many people as possible. Also, especially in this video, all diagrams or pictures presented are abstract conceptual representations, not literal representations. You literally can't draw or see the sort of stuff we're going to be talking about in this video. It's completely abstract. The diagrams and pictures are there to help you visually represent these concepts, to help you grasp them better. And this video's concepts are not easy. We are going to be talking about a place of pure abstraction that doesn't even make sense to try to draw or see or consciously perceive in any way, shape or form. Before we jump into the hard technical stuff today, note very well that just because someone has a great intellectual or conceptual understanding of the technical details of the process of creation, or about God, does not mean they are an enlightened or accomplished soul. I am an example of such a case. Knowledge practiced is what makes wisdom or spiritual growth, not just knowledge alone. There is a difference between knowing the path and actually doing it. Take any endeavor. Climbing Everest, getting a PhD, becoming a world-class athlete. You can learn and know all about the process and everything you're required to do to achieve that destination, but actually doing it is what matters or counts, and where you find out what you're made of and what you discover your potential. Spiritual growth and evolution are not just about being able to fully consciously, although subconsciously is a totally different story, know about God and being able to wonderfully articulate it and be flawless in philosophical discussion or debate. All that stuff ties in more closely with biological intelligence capabilities. And intelligence and wisdom are not necessarily correlated. You can find a super intelligent person, IQ 200, photographic unforgetful memory, can remember more than 9 items in their working memory, has been overeducated and whatever else, right? Just someone that scores off the charts in terms of measures of intelligence and cognitive capabilities, but is completely unconscious and therefore ignorant of God and the truth of God. even acts completely evil. Their ego dominates. Even if they know and can articulate all the technical stuff about God, their action reveals they don't have the full understanding or realization of God. It's merely on the intellectual, conceptual level, not the full realization, and not on the practiced knowledge level. On the other hand, you may find someone whose intelligence is completely not their strong point, who doesn't consciously fully know all this stuff, but subconsciously or intuitively does, and who can't perfectly articulate all about God and their subconscious knowledge, or beat anyone in debate or intellectual discussion, but acts purely and nobly with loving kindness and wisdom, and has their ego in check and not in the position of dominance. That is what is most important and what counts. Someone like this can teach through direct example and automatically has a powerful impact on others, consciously or subconsciously, which in a direct sense accomplishes more and has more of an effect than having to lay it out like what I'm doing here in a heavy technical way, which anyone with a learning difficulty is at a disadvantage here. And also, clearly in that little example I just gave, the lower intelligence person is more accomplished and more spiritually evolved than the super intelligent person. Biological intelligence does not give you conscious awareness of, or does not bring your consciousness closer to, or united with God. You do not need to know the technical details of the process of creation in order to become enlightened, one with God, Christhood, fully human, or whatever you prefer to call it. The compassion of loving kindness is the only condition that will cause the seed of enlightenment to sprout within the human soul. Perfect the compassion of loving kindness in yourself, and your consciousness will grow as the tree of spiritual knowledge and understanding, and allow it to bear its fruits, which is to transform you into a full human being, a noble, moral character. Intellectually grasping and understanding the technical details of the process of divine creation will not cause you to become enlightened. Only informed about the process, know the path, basically. In order to become enlightened, your soul must undergo every technical aspect of this same process, and that can only be done through fully developing the compassion of loving kindness so that you become a divine being of love. All this process goes on within your consciousness without you having to consciously know about it. Your higher level of consciousness does all this and passes it into your subconscious. It is only when your higher consciousness, which is God or divine universal consciousness, is fully linked to your mundane earth consciousness, that this knowledge is revealed to you at the outer level of your everyday consciousness. This information in these videos is to help those people who are ready to be inspired to make the effort to increase their rate of spiritual progress by helping them to better understand what it is they are working towards and why it is important. It is to help them put the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle of life together at a faster rate. And this is us getting started today. Also note that though we can't fully know God in its entirety, particularly the aspect of mind, you don't need to know mind or have the philosophy or theory of the process of creation told to you in order to know or have evidence or prove the existence of God. The fact that you have consciousness and are thus aware of your existence is all the evidence that is really necessary to prove the existence of God. The philosopher Descartes made the famous quote, "I think, therefore I am." The fundamental component of this statement is, I think. The logic of this statement is, I think, therefore I draw the conclusion that I exist. There is I thinking, which leads to the conclusion, I think, so I exist. I thinking, conclusion, I exist. This statement alone does not reveal the full process involved in the knowledge of existence. This statement is not completely satisfying because it does not explain who is the I that is thinking and what is thinking. How does the I think? And how does the I know that it is thinking? And how does the I know that it is because it thinks? Or in other words, how does this conclusion come about? The answer to these questions is knowledge. Knowledge is the answer to every question. I exist because of knowledge. Knowledge creates I, and as soon as there is an I, there is the awareness of existence. In order to make a more satisfying explanation to the conclusion, I think and so I am, one needs to also turn it around and also say, I am and so I think. Or, I think therefore I am therefore I think. One needs to break away from the habit of linear thinking and form the habit of circular thinking. Circular thinking connects everything together, while linear thinking tends to isolate things and misses vital components and connections. I think, but who is I? How does I get the concept of I and understand it? I think, but what is thinking? Thinking is the process of thought, and thought is a complex process which goes through different stages of development in order to form knowledge. Thought is not limited to words. Thought is the creator of knowledge. Through the knowledge of thought, awareness forms, and through the knowledge of awareness, the concept of I then forms. Once the concept of I forms, I has knowledge of thought and thinks I am aware. This then leads to the knowledge and understanding that I exists because of the knowledge which comes from the awareness of I thinking. And so the process continues on. This is a summary of the process of thought that continuously creates existence. It is an ongoing process. It does not begin and end. It continuously interloops. Mind is limitless potentiality, and everything emerges from limitless potentiality and is absorbed back into it, only to emerge anew and to be absorbed back again. This is the pulse, the heartbeat of life itself. Also notice there are 13 stages in the process of thought. 13 is the mystical number of unity. You'll notice in religious texts, mythological stories, or other creative works of art, 13 commonly appears. This is what the stories and the characters in those stories or symbols in those stories are representing. This is the process of being, which is to be aware of existence through consciousness, which will be explained. To broaden the statement, I think therefore I am, I would say, I am aware of my thinking, and the awareness of my thinking allows me to know that I think. This same awareness allows me to think that there is an I who is thinking, and therefore this I exists. Otherwise, I could not think. The awareness of my thinking allows me to know that I am. Or, I know I am because I am aware that I am because I think. And that awareness allows me to think that I am, and therefore be conscious that I am thinking. Consciousness is awareness of thought, which allows thought to form into knowledge, which allows knowledge to form into understanding. Consciousness is knowledge of being, and being is existence. Your soul is your consciousness, which is your awareness of your own existence. Unformed mind forms consciousness. Pure mind, which is divine love, is the uncreated or unmanifest aspect of God. From here on, this will be often referred to simply as mind or pure potentiality, for ease of not having to constantly use every one of mind's names or labels. Basically, so I'm not constantly having to say mind, potential energy, pure potentiality, the eternal principle. absolute reality, ultimate reality, the absolute pure divine love, etc., etc., etc. Just mind or potential energy is the term I'm going to most often use from here on. So, how does the unmanifest manifest? How does non-existence create existence? How does non-being become all being? How does pure potentiality become actuality? How do you get something from nothing? How does nothing become something that is everything? That is going to be explained here. That process, going from nothing to something, is the process of thought. So, if you're focused and ready to think and pay attention and get into the hard stuff, let's learn and understand this process. Even though mind is without condition, it has the ability to create it. This ability to create condition is known as desire and will, and what these are exactly will be explained shortly. Now, it will be argued that desire and will are conditions. I will argue that desire and will are actually preconditions. A precondition means bring into a required condition beforehand. Mind is absence of condition, but it is and has limitless potential condition. Thus, it has limitless ability to create. Potential isness without form has precondition and thus pre-existence. This is what is meant when it is said the universe was created from nothingness. No thingness is the absence of any form, the absence of constitution, but it is not the absence of pre-form or pre-constitution. Mind has potential energy. Energy that is yet to be created, which means to take on form. Mind is potentiality. Mind therefore has the power to create power. Mind has the potential to become a force, the one force of life, of all being, of all existence. Mind is also latent. Mind is the origin of existence, the origin of the source of energy. Do not confuse this origin with the formation of the matter of the physical universe, although it is based on the same principles. Mind has potential existence or pre-existence, and is therefore the source of all being. The potential existence is the source from which divine universal God consciousness is formed or created. Mind is absolute non-subjectivity, or pure objectivity, as it has no perception, no point from which to experience, and nothing to experience. Yet mind has the potential to become conscious, and to thus become all-perceiving, all-experiencing, and so all-knowing, or omniscient. Before I talk about this next part, it's potentially a good idea to pause the video here and take a good look at this diagram. In order to have knowledge, form must be created by the mind to harness potential power and convert it into creative power. Intelligence is the ability to form, the ability to apprehend and grasp onto unformed impulses of pure potential energy and say, "Come here," and collect them into a field, which is a region in which force can become effective. Intelligence allows form to form. Form is the control of potential power, or potential energy, limiting it by bringing it under control or order. Intelligence allows for the collection of information, and information is the source of knowledge. A quick recap from the last video. The eternal principle is devoid of knowledge, as it is non-existence or non-being, and can be defined as limitless potential energy, which is the mind of God. It can also be defined as the non-state before manifestation, and thus before experience begins. It can also be defined as pure mind, without any form of consciousness or awareness, without dimension. It can also be defined as spiritual perfection, which means having the limitless potential to convert into form, manifest as form, and change form. Absolute perfection is not an end result, but rather the realization of the ability of limitless potential to create limitless possibility. It can also be defined as absolute reality or ultimate reality because nothing is relative to any other thing, as no thing exists except pre-existing unformed potential energy. Potential energy does not look like anything because it has no shape, no form. Potential energy does not sound like anything because it doesn't exist. Potential energy is invisible and intangible and is therefore unable to be directly perceived. Potential energy is the no-thingness, the great void, but the void is also limitless creative potential. Potential energy, because it is potentially creative, is the no thing from which everything is created. Our consciousness gives us evidence and proof of physical existence, as we are able to perceive, through the physical senses, actual energy or formed energy as physical matter. We do not usually have difficulty in perceiving our own physical existence and experiencing things of a physical nature. We have hard evidence that physical energy exists. Our consciousness gives us evidence and proof that we are a being that can think and feel in a variety of ways. We can't physically see our thoughts or feelings, but we know that they exist because we experience them through our consciousness. Our consciousness therefore has another kind of sense, a mental emotional sense. Thoughts and emotions are also forms of energy, but are more subtle and do not have physical makeup, but they are still mentally tangible. We have evidence that thoughts and emotions exist and proof of them through our experience, and so mental emotional energy must exist in a more subtle form than physical energy. This should alert us to the fact that existent energy can be more abstract and thus be mentally tangible, but physically intangible. Our consciousness can also give us evidence and proof of a level of existence that is beyond the tangibility of just our physical and mental emotional senses. This is psychic or spiritual sense. While this is not currently being experienced in a dramatic way by most people, it nevertheless exists, whether or not you happen to be a believer. For those who do experience psychic spiritual energy in a more direct manner, it is tangible through both the physical and mental emotional senses, but also involves an extrasensory sense that is beyond our usual physical, mental, emotional senses. This sense is more subtle than our usual thoughts and emotions. The fact that some people experience it and others don't should alert us to the fact that some people are more able to perceive an energy that is even more subtle than personal thoughts and feelings, but which is still tangible to a consciousness that is sensitive enough to experience it. For people who have experienced it, this is evidence and proof that energy can be far more subtle still than physical or mental emotional. Our consciousness, however, does not give us any proof of limitless creative potential energy, because it is absolutely intangible as it does not actually exist. The evidence of potential energy is only revealed by the reasoning that energy itself has to come from somewhere. It has to have a source, otherwise it could not exist. Potential energy cannot be proved as such, as it cannot be experienced in a direct sense. But it can be intuitively apprehended by those who are mentally capable of considering pure abstraction, of considering non-existing potential energy as absolute reality due to its unformed eternal limitlessness that is inherently capable of producing limitless possibility, of considering non-being as the parent of being. To recap, mind is pure potentiality. Mind is therefore pure abstraction. Mind has no form, no boundary, no limitations, and therefore no limits. Mind has no beginning and no end. It is eternal. Mind is the fathomless, motionless, silent potential powerhouse of all power. Mind is the ultimate mystery. Everything that has come into existence has come from the singular source of unformed potential energy, the eternal principle, or in other words, the mind of God, which is also known as the Absolute or as pure divine love. Pure potential energy, or God's mind as pure divine love, in a purely inactive state, does not move. It is perfectly silent and still. From a section from the Tao Te Ching, the silent song of Tao is the ultimate music. Remember from the last video, and even if you don't, I'm going to recap this important information. Seemingly paradoxical, the perfect rest of mind is the source of all energy, which is activity. And also seemingly paradoxical, it is the contrast between activity and non-activity which allows activity, which is consciousness, to become conscious of the perfect stillness of mind as pure potential energy, and conscious of it as its source. The state of opposites allows each opposite to know of itself through perceptual comparison. When activity as consciousness perceives inactivity, which is mind, it perceives that there is a state that is opposite to it, an inactive state, and can thus discern it, distinguish it as being different to itself. Consciousness can therefore perceive the reality of mind through the awareness of an opposite state to its own. Silence and stillness as opposed to sound and activity. The perfect rest of absolute inactivity, mind, the void or nothingness, emptiness, etc., means that mind is dark without any light, as light is an effect which comes from activity, which puts a whole new twist on who's afraid of the dark, doesn't it? Mind, or pure potential energy, is not really dark, however, unless there is something to compare it with. Consciousness can only perceive mind as dark due to mind's difference in comparison with its active state. It is better, therefore, to say that mind, or pure potentiality, is devoid of visible light. Mind as non-existence, non-being, is non-activity, and so is invisible compared to being or existence, which is visible because it is active. Invisible means unable to be perceived through visible light, and perception is an aspect of consciousness, is itself a form of spiritual light. We're not talking about physical light here. For this reason, the eternal principle, pure mind as pure potentiality, will eternally remain invisible to consciousness. That was all said in the last video, and what to take from that was to note you will never directly perceive your own mind, your own pure potentiality. You can only perceive your state of consciousness. However, by accessing an extremely heightened state of consciousness through an extreme spiritual evolution in your own individual consciousness, which is your soul, you will then be able to intuitively apprehend the reality of your mind, or pure potentiality, as your eternal source of existence. Mind is the eternal principle in you, the source of your soul, your consciousness. You have been made in God's image, which means you have both mind and consciousness. Therefore, you, like God, are a fathomless mystery. Pure mind or pure potentiality cannot be apparent because it has no visible light, as it is absolute formlessness and therefore absolute intangibility. In order to have apparent light or visible light, there must be apparent or visible form. Apparent light can only be formed through activity, and pure potentiality is non-activity. Pure mind or pure potentiality, however, can become less absolutely non-apparent, less absolutely intangible, and less absolutely invisible. Pure potential energy is capable of degrees of immateriality or intangibility. Pure potentiality is capable of instigating the process of coming into being. Through the process of coming into existence, pure potential energy can develop shadows, so to speak. Shadow comes from the word shade. Pure potential energy has shades of potentiality. Shadow in this context means shade or a patch of shade, the slightest trace, a weak or insubstantial remnant or thing. Pure mind or pure potential energy does not exist anywhere as it has no dimension, and yet it is able to become pre-existent. Pre-existence is the first shade or shadow to appear in pure potentiality, the first smudge of activity and thus the first hint of light. A smudge is a blurred or smeared line or mark, a blot. Pre-existence is a fuzzy hunch, a vague inkling. Pre-existence is pure potential energy's possibility of forming, and thus of coming into existence, of becoming. Mind, or pure potential energy's primary formation is thought. Through an inclination towards creating thought, mind first creates the possibility of forming thought, and thus the possibility of becoming apparently active or visibly, tangibly active. Mind, as the eternal principle, has the first inkling of possibility of forming thought, and thus becoming active through its activity, forming light. Pre-existence, the possibility of pure potential energy becoming formed, thus causes pure mind or pure potential energy to become a shade less darker than absolute pitch invisibility. Possibility enlightens the absolute darkness of pure mind or pure potentiality because possibility as pre-existence is the father of activity, and even possible activity causes a degree of lightness in pure potentiality or mind. How does the enlightenment of mind or pure potential energy occur? Pure potential energy or mind stirs ever so slightly in its utter stillness, and intuits through unformed thought that there is potential power. Unformed thought is random impulses of pure potentiality, which will be explained soon. So, pure potentiality or mind, without a state of consciousness, has the ability to vaguely suspect a possibility, but it is not grasped at this stage. Suspect in this sense means have an impression of the existence of or presence of, or believe tentatively without clear ground, or to be inclined to think. Mind or pure potential energy intuitively apprehends a vague impression of the unformed possibility of potential power, and thus the potential to act, to do something. This is just the slightest trace, the weakest signal or impulse of vague pre-awareness. To intuit is to see or become aware before anything happens, including thought, which means before consciously knowing, as knowing is only possible through consciousness. To have insight or awareness before knowing is to apprehend an as yet unformed possibility, and thus an unformed thought. To intuit is to know by intuition, and intuition is immediate apprehension by the mind without reasoning. Intuition is pre-perception and thus preconception. Intuition is the highest function of mind or pure potentiality. Mind, pure potentiality or pure potential energy, cannot reason without consciousness, but it can intuit, which means it can apprehend the vaguest of impressions. Impression in this sense means a vague notion. Mind as unformed pure potential energy is non-existent, but it intuitively apprehends a vague impression that pure potentiality has the potential power to exist and to thus pre-form the thought of the possibility of existence. The vague, intuitive impression of potential power creates mind's primordially emerging sense of a vague, unformed thought about the notion of possibility. This is the beginning stage of the creative power of imagination. Imagination is pre-existence. Imagination is harnessing potentiality and forming possibilities. Imagination is a mental faculty forming images or concepts of external objects not present to the senses. The ability of the mind to be creative or resourceful. The process of imagining, and imagining is forming a concept, thinking, conceiving, supposing. From one of Rumi's many great poems and quotes of wisdom, "You, Allah, are not a product of my imagination. I am a product of your imagination." Unformed thought, as a vague hunch or inkling, is potential energy awaiting instructions, orders, commands, and thus awaiting activation. Unformed thought can be likened to the readiness to inhale, the anticipation of beginning to breathe and thus to come alive. It may help with the understanding of this concept if you concentrate on your own breathing. Sit still and single out each inhale of breath. Now become aware of the slightest moment just before you actually inhale, that minute anticipation of your capability to breathe in. And why do you want to breathe in? Is there not an uncontrollable urge or compulsion to do so? And why? Because breathing in is a vital motion to being alive, vital to your existence. Breath begins with inhalation, collecting air and contracting some of it down into the lungs. Thought also begins as inhalation, a collection of potential energy, drawing it together and contracting it. The motion of thought is the vital breath of mind that gives it lungs so it can come to life. Without instructions, potential energy cannot form itself, and so it cannot get made or be created. Potential energy needs to inhale, needs to draw in pure limitless potentiality and contain it a little. In order to do this, instructions must be given. To help with understanding through a mundane and somewhat clumsy analogy, imagine that you have the idea that you want to keep cool, so you buy a fan contained in a box that requires self-assembly. In the unopened box are all the parts that are required to put the fan together. In the box there is no fan as such, just the possibility of becoming a fan by having the parts assembled together in the right way. Now, the first thing you need to do is to open the box. Without opening the box, it is not possible to make the fan, as it is not possible to grasp onto the parts needed to put it together. Without opening the box, the fan remains just a possibility, but you know that the possibility is possible to achieve through action, so you desire to open the box so that you can release the possibility of making a fan. To open the box, you need to move. To move, you have to have the desire to take action. What impels you to move is the desire to have a fan to keep cool, and so you take action to open the box. You need to grasp onto the box, connect with it. Without connecting with the box, which contains all the parts of the potential fan, you cannot release any possibility of making the fan and keeping cool. To open the box requires you to open the seal. You need to pull open the seal by drawing it away from the box, whether it be tape or staples. It is only by drawing the seal away that it is possible to open the box and again access the parts inside. Once access is available, you can then remove, extract, draw out the contents of the box, which are all the parts of the fan needed for its assembly. What you then require is instructions on how to put it together correctly so that it becomes a working fan that will keep you cool. But the parts of the fan have been pre-made, although not assembled. They are disconnected parts awaiting to be organized. Without the information needed to put the parts together in a cohesive order that will allow the fan to become a fan that functions as a fan, it will remain a possibility and not an actuality. Once you have the necessary information and can understand it, you have the knowledge necessary to assemble the parts together into a cohesive unit, and it becomes a generalization, a fan. Thought operates in a similar fashion. At the semi-form stage of pre-existence, the eternal principle is established as the seed and the root cause of all existence. Pure potentiality is the seed of existence, the potential of creating and becoming the entire universe, and the vague impression of possibility, which is pre-thought, is the root cause of existence. It is important to remember that we are not talking about the creation of the physical universe here, but the creation of the first dimension of the spiritual universe, the world or realm of pure consciousness, which is the highest heaven, also known as the kingdom of heaven, the pure land, nirvana, etc. This is the establishing of the cosmic tree of life, the tree of life being cosmic or universal consciousness, or God consciousness. The seed from which the tree of life grows is pure potentiality, pure mind. The root, and thus the first cause of universal or cosmic consciousness, is pre-thought, which is the process of mind moving into a state of formation. This is why the mystic tree of life is portrayed as an inverted tree with the roots above and growing upward into the sky. The sky symbolizes the non-formation of thought, or pure potentiality, and the root as the formation of thought as possibility. So, to recap and elaborate further, pure potentiality, or mind, is ready to awaken itself, to become active. In order to do that, mind must create a formed thought of possibility. Pure potentiality cannot directly cause form, it must awaken and become active and convert or change into the state of possibility in order to do so. Only the state of possibility can cause form. Pure potentiality or mind is therefore impossibility, eternally anticipating its readiness to become limitless possibility. Impotent, unformed power, ready to become potent, formed power. In order for limitless pure potential energy to convert into limitless possibility, pure potential energy has to be directed and put into some kind of order so that it can create information. Pure potentiality needs to take root. Pure potentiality needs to begin to define itself so that it can become tangible. The intangible seed of the cosmic tree of life causes root to develop and form. Pure potential energy, mind, causes possibility to develop, to take pre-root as pre-conscious thought. The pre-root of consciousness, which is the tree of life, the pre-root is limitless possibility, which is pre-conscious thought. Just as the root of a tree first developed from the seed, so does consciousness. Mind is the seed of God's universal consciousness, and just as it is through the activation of the potential energy contained within the seed in a plant, the roots are able to form, take hold, and develop, so too does God's consciousness take hold and develop after coming forth from the seed of mind via the process of pre-formation. Existence thus has its pre-root in non-existence. This is why the mystic tree of life has an unusual root system with upward growing roots. This means the pre-thought and thus pre-consciousness as the pre-root cause of existence is above the state of existence itself. There is no actual formation of consciousness, just the preconceived notion of it. So the invisible or intangible pre-root of creation, which is potential energy converting into possible energy as pre-consciousness, remains above the surface level of existence, in a metaphorical sense. This initial stage of existence is pure imagination. Imagination, the preconception of possibility, is the beginning of creation, the pre-root cause. From a part in the Katha Upanishads, part 6, verse 1, there is an ancient tree, the primeval tree of life, like the banya tree with roots shooting up and whose branches fall down. Unconditional pure potentiality needs to undergo a process in order to become conditioned and thus controlled, disciplined, by being placed under confinement and thus under restrictions or limitations. Absolute limitlessness, mind, has to conform ever so slightly under the innate intuitive discipline of the inclination to become limitless possibility, to become the root of consciousness. Conform is derived from the prefix com, meaning with, together, or jointly, and form, meaning arrangement of parts. Conform in this context means to be or make accordance or suitable, to become limitless possibility. Or form according to a pattern. A pattern is a regular or logical form, order, or arrangement of parts. Or comply with, be in accordance with. Inclination from incline, from the Latin word for bend, means in this context a disposition or propensity. Disposition in this sense means setting in order, in place, arranging. Inclination in this sense also means make willing or favorably disposed, or give a specified tendency to, or bend, or lean or turn away from a given direction. Pure potentiality, or mind's inherent inclination to create order from chaos, or pure potential energy, is the primordial source of divine will or desire. Potential power is naturally inclined towards becoming powerful because potential power creates actual power, and it does so firstly through the will or desire to do so. Will desire is mind's motive for activity. Pure potentiality, or mind, is intuitively inclined to move from utter inactivity and become disposed towards activity, which means disposed towards moving from unknowing to the beginning stage of knowing through the primary precondition of pre-experience or pre-existence, which is pre-consciousness. Mind is thus in the process of becoming preconditioned, becoming prepared to limit itself ever so slightly and to thus become ever so slightly informed. In order to do this, mind is inclined to make oblivion, or pure limitless, unformed potentiality, conform ever so slightly into an extremely loosely contained pattern of association, a chaotically ordered arrangement called pre-thought. Oblivion is pure mind or potentiality devoid of information. However, through a purely intuitive apprehension of an extremely vague impression of potential power, oblivion becomes a shade less oblivious and a shade more tangible. Intuitive pre-awareness or potential power, and thus pre-knowing or knowing before consciously knowing, makes a primordial impression on mind or pure potentiality, and thus creates the first precondition of effect that is yet to be formed. The faint impression is just enough to cause pure potentiality or mind to have a vague inkling of potential power, and this innately creates a primordial understone of curiosity. Curiosity is an eager desire to know, inquisitiveness. Mind or pure potentiality arouses the hidden unconscious desire to know power by desiring to seek knowledge of power. Desire to know potential is innate to potentiality. Potentiality can only know its potential by doing something, by creating activity. The ability to create activity is the innate creative power of potential energy. The inclination of pure mind or pure potentiality to become active is the first cause of all experience, and thus of creation, and first occurs as the pre-manifest stage in the process of the development of divine thought. Mind's precognition or pre-awareness of its potential power to create energy and thus to create experience is the first purely abstract effect. Pre-awareness or precognition allows oblivion to move towards possibility, to move from no knowledge towards possible knowledge, and thus possible experience. Cognition, from the Latin word cognitio, means apprehend, means, in philosophy, knowing, perceiving, or conceiving as an act or faculty distinct from emotion and violation, or a result of this, a perception, sensation, notion, or intuition. Mind's precognition is therefore pure intuition, as there is no existence at this stage, and so no perception, no sensation, no notion. There is only abstract or unformed intuition as a vague, extremely subtle, and very loosely apprehended impression of potential power. Pure intuition is pure potentialities, or mind's, preliminary stirring or arousal of the desire to become aware of its desire to know its potential. Mind's intuitive impression of potential power is the foundation, the seed of divine thought. But first, the impression of potential power preforms as pre-thought. Pre-thought is unconscious awareness, or better explained as unconditioned awareness or intuitive awareness. At this stage, actual thought has not formed, and so condition does not exist. Mind, or pure potentiality, is still unconditional, and so still limitless. Without condition, there is no relationship, and therefore no relativity. Unformed thought, or pre-thought, is unrelated, is independent of form, and therefore formless. Thought is a condition, and consciousness is a condition. Prior to thought and prior to consciousness is the precondition of unconscious or purely intuitive awareness of potential power. This stage in the process of creation is mind as father of all creation, potential energy as the active source of consciousness. Mind is about to come into being, into a state or condition. Or, in other words, the non-manifest is about to make itself manifest as consciousness, which means the father is about to become the mother through the birth of their divine son, thought. All three are aspects of the eternal principles coming into being as life, existence, formed energy. Intuitive awareness creates the vague impression that mind, or pure potentiality as absolute non-activity, has innate ability to act and thus become active. Mind, or pure potentiality, has the vague inkling that it desires. Desire begins as impulse. Pure potentiality, or mind's intuitive arousal into precognition, pre-awareness, creates a purely abstract wave of potential excitation, which has the effect of creating the manifest preliminary impulse of potential motion, and with it, potential light. Potential energy is on the threshold of possibility. Through the arousal or awakening of pre-awareness, pure potentiality or mind develops a preliminary potential impulse. Potential impulse does not exist in any tangible manner as no action has yet taken place. Mind, or potentiality, just intuitively apprehends the latent capability of the desire to act. In order for mind, or pure potentiality's very vague impression of potential to be active and thus desire to act, the extremely abstract wave of excitation or potential impulse needs to become more intense. Potential impulse to act must transform into possible impulse to act. Mind, the source of all potentiality and thus all possibility, cannot know itself because it has no self, no sense of awareness, and therefore it cannot be aware of its own power. Awareness requires information. In the stateless state of non-awareness, or utter unconsciousness, there is no information because there is no formed energy. There is only formless potential energy. Only formed energy can be informed. Mind must therefore become intelligent so that formless potential energy can be formed into a means of expressing its latent desire to create and thus know itself. God, the mastermind of the absolute universe, is the creator of all forms of intelligence and at the same time is all forms of intelligence. A mastermind is a person with an outstanding intellect, the person directing an intricate operation. Is not life an intricate operation? Pure divine mind is potentially all-powerful. It is potentially omnipotent. In order to become aware of its latent power, mind must stir from its unconsciousness, its non-awareness. And if you think this is impossible, think of your own mind. If you are able to delve into it deeply enough, does it also operate from an unconscious level? In fact, if you keep going down and down and down and deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, you'll find that you are operating exactly in this process that we are here describing. Faculty is an aptitude or ability for a particular activity, an inherent mental or physical power. Intellect is the faculty of reasoning, knowing and thinking as distinct from feeling, the understanding of mental powers. How does mind become intelligent and thus create the faculty of the intellect? In order to become intelligent, informed, mind must awaken, become aware. What awakens mind? The desire to know itself through the expression of its creative power. Mind desires to express its power. The non-manifest desires to manifest, as this is the only way mind can know itself. And this is what spiritual and ultimately physical energy is. The expression of mind's or God's desire to know itself. To know is to have knowledge of. To have knowledge requires information. Information requires a means of processing it so that it can be apprehended or perceived and thus understood. The intellect is the means of processing information. The intellect can only operate in the condition of consciousness. Desire at the pre-existent state is yet without form. Potential energy is without form. It has not been informed. However, desire is the prerequisite to the act of forming and therefore to the creation of information. Potential energy is what has been termed in spiritual texts as chaos. This is not to be confused with the negative connotations this word now has in common mundane usage. In spiritual terms, chaos means formless matter. Formless matter is formless because it is without force. Potential energy is the power of mind to create force and thus to form formless pre-existent energy into formed existing energy. Potential energy is the essence of mind and thus the essence of creation. Formless matter, which is another name for potential energy, has no organization and therefore behaves randomly, unpredictably. It is unfused, which means it has no connection, no organization, no state of association, no relativity because there is no information. Formless matter is not connected and this is why it has no form. For this reason, it is still considered as stateless. Potential energy pre-exists as random, disassociated, infinite impulses. Mind has potential energy, infinite impulses of potentiality. So dimensionlessness has the potential, the latent hidden power, to create dimension and thus existence. Potential energy, the essence, transforms to become the substance of divine thought, which is spiritual sound. Potential energy is limitless impulses of potential power, but because it is dimensionless, potential energy has no existent state. It is totally unformed and thus lacks information. One could say it is clueless, without intelligence because it is not capable of thought. What are the limitless impulses made from? Nothing. Literally, nothing. They are simply potential movement with nothing to move, or potential action with no way of acting. Hard to imagine, certainly, because impulses of potentiality are beyond the structured form of imagination, as imagination requires thought, which is structure. Impulses of potentiality are beyond the realm of structured imagination, and that is why mind is such a mystery. However, for the spiritually enlightened soul, this concept is intuitively known and understood. Infinite impulses of potential energy is God's or mind's infinite pre-existing desire, as mind's desire is without form. It is non-existent other than an impulse to express into form, to change from dimensionlessness into a state of dimension, which is form. Desire, infinite impulses of potentiality, is what wakes mind from inertia. It sets the ball rolling, so to speak, so that life can come to be in existence. Mind, as dimensionlessness, is not yet conscious of its desire because consciousness has not yet been formed. Without consciousness, there can be no such thing as the existence of life, because consciousness is a state of dimension and thus existence. Desire provides mind with the impetus to convert potential energy into the vessel known as consciousness. In order for a dimension to be formed, there needs to occur some kind of organization of limitless potential energy. A force needs to be created so that this can happen. Otherwise, limitless potential energy will remain unformed random unintelligence, unable to express its limitless potency or power to create, which means to come into existence. Thus, mind's unconscious desire moves into pre-thought mode. Mind's pre-thought mode, in its intuitively unconscious state, is the force known as will. Mind's force begins as a change in state, which comes about through a vague intuitive pre-perception of disturbance in mind's state of inertia. Force is will. Thus, will, or mind force compelled by desire, is what brings forth existence. Potential energy needs to move from a state of potentiality into a state of formation, or actuality, in order for the will of desire to be expressed. Without a transformation from a potential state to an actual state, existence or form of any kind cannot occur. Will springs from desire and becomes fused. Divine will is thus the expression of mind's divine desire to create, which stems from the ability and capacity to create so that mind can have knowledge. Mind can only have knowledge of its power when such a thing as knowledge comes to be, and knowledge can only be in a state of existence, a state of condition. The will of God, the force of God's intention and thus purpose for existence, is what brings forth form or existence. Nothing can come into existence without the force known as the will of God, or divine will. Absolutely nothing. In the ultimate sense, everything is the will of God. Divine will is the answer to the physicist's elusive one theory of everything. Mind desires to arouse from its non-existent dimensionlessness or statelessness, and through will, expresses its latent potential for creation. Mind desires to arouse from absolute non-existence into existence. Mind desires to create. Divine will is thus the first cause of creation. Divine will creates the primal point of existence, and through it, all other forms of existence spring. Divine will sets up the originating divine principle of actual cause and effect, which is also known as the law of karma, law of love, or dharma. The law of cause and effect is the oscillating system that sets things in motion. Cause and effect is a very simple principle, but through its simplicity, limitless infinite possibilities can emerge. Life or creation is the ongoing, ever-changing manifestation of the originating principle of cause and effect, or God's will. And for this reason, life or creation is also controlled by it. The control is simply every cause creates an effect that will create or set up another cause and another effect, which will create another cause and another effect, which will create another cause and another effect, and so on, continuously. Everything in the spiritual and physical universe is governed by the law of love, karma, cause and effect, and it is for this reason that there is no pure chaos or pure potentiality in the created universe. Chaos is unformed energy. Everything in the universe, including and especially thought and emotion, is formed by the formation of energy, otherwise it simply couldn't exist. Everything happens for a reason, because everything that happens is the result of formed energy. All energy is under the will of God, and nothing is without purpose or haphazard, as far as energy itself is concerned. Divine will, which is the law of cause and effect, establishes the foundation for the first dimension of existence. Will is the first tangible movement, force, action that emerges from mind. This act of will is motivated by mind's desire to create so that mind can know its power. Will is what moves potential, non-manifest energy into manifest energy or tangible energy. Will changes or transforms potential energy from dimensionlessness into the first level of dimension, which is pre-existence. Pre-existence can be thought of as the stage before something actually happens, before an action has an effect. Pre-existence is a possible cause that has not produced an effect. To give it some kind of an analogy, think of mind as airless, but having the potential to make air. Air cannot be created until its components or substance has been formed. Until there are components to make air, no air can come into existence. Mind's first task or act, then, is to make the components necessary for air to form. In order to make components, dimension needs to be formed so that components can exist. Components can only exist through the acquiring of information. No, we're not going to go through the whole process God has to do to make or become air. Mind's unformed resource is potential energy. Infinite potential literally means that potential energy can take on infinite appearances or shapes. Once potential energy has taken on form, it is then limited, confined to a condition or existence. The more limited the form, the less creative power it can manifest. The less limited the form, the greater the creative power it can manifest. And things for us here in the physical third dimension are very limited indeed. Mind must act in order to create. In order to act, an action must be instigated. Desire is what arouses mind in readiness to act. Will is thus activated by desire. Will is the instigator, that which causes action. Desire and will are thus conjoined inseparably in action. Action of any kind can only occur through mind's desire and will to act. Desire will is activation, and so it is of a masculine quality, but it is not male. Male is a gender, a condition, and mind has no gender because it has no state, no condition. The confusion between masculine and male has led to much confusion and ignorance in the conventional understanding of religions and thus of God. Masculine in its truest sense means vigorous. Divine will is energetic. It energizes. Divine will is thus the working of mind or the activation of pure potentiality. Divine will, the first and thus primal point of existence, is the one force of all being. The one force which causes or brings forth creation, that makes energy. Divine will issues directly from mind, or God. Divine will is the point of existence, in all possible senses, and it brings forth not only the manifestation of energy, but along with it, the purpose and meaning of life, which is the expression of mind's desire to know itself. All energy comes from divine mind. All energy is mind in manifestation so that mind can know its power. Mind is the source of all being. Now, this is another one of those parts where I feel I really need to slow down, as this concept can be very difficult to grasp, picture, or imagine. Divine will, the first motion and thus the first act of mind, organizes potential non-manifest energy into infinite impulses of possibility through its motion. Divine will, at this stage we are currently talking about, has no substance because it is operating pre-existently. Divine will gathers together formless, chaotic, infinite impulses of potentiality or harnesses potential energy. Divine will, as the originating point of spiritual creation, which is the primal point of existence, caused two. Yes, just two. From an infinity of chaotic, formless impulses of potentiality, completely without information and therefore without awareness, to unite by moving them together. Impulses lacking substance cannot do this. They can't find each other. They need a matchmaker. They need to be fused through force or motion. Divine will is the force, the matchmaker. It may be impossible to imagine, but two impulses of potential energy without any substance did fuse together, crossed paths, so to speak, through the motion of divine will, which is the expression of mind's desire to create. We are dealing with extremely abstract concepts here, so don't stress at all if it takes some time to even start getting the idea. Your own state of consciousness will allow this to happen when it is ready to. Remember what I said at the start of this video? Just knowing the technical details of the process of creation will not make you become enlightened. Only the compassion of loving kindness can do this, can make the seed of enlightenment sprout. All this stuff, all this process goes on within your own consciousness without you having to directly consciously know about it. The act of unification of two chaotic impulses of infinite potential energy preformed the origin of existence, and this preformation is the essence of the seed of life. The seed of life as a whole is the genesis of coming into being, coming into existence. The supra-quantumly small motion of divine will, small far beyond our comprehension or calculation ability, forms the first point of reference that initiates the state of relativity as an abstract idea. Please keep in mind that we are still not talking about the physical universe here, but the spiritual, which is mind matter and made of far, far, far finer stuff than any physical atoms. Although the motion is unimaginably small, it is unimaginably powerful, the result of which produces the entirety of all the components of the spiritual universe, and through which the physical universe is consequently also formed in a much further de-evolved dimension. De-evolved because the further away you move from the mind of God, the less alike to it things become, and to get to physical matter, it has to move very far away indeed. And also note that the further away you are in your consciousness to God, the less you act like God. You're not all compassionate and wise and lovingly detached, etc. Instead, you're blindly ignorant and fearfully selfish to some degree until you evolve consciously back. This will be explained in other videos. The motion or force of divine will, infinitely minute, is within each and every minute component of all existence. Every one. All energy is thus spiritual force at work. In order to be relative, there needs to be 2 points of reference. That is, something that is relative to something else. Relativity is caused by a state of separation within the completely unified field of potential energy, otherwise known as mind. Non-state or non-being has no reference point. Potential energy, infinite impulses of divine desire, is absoluteness, wholeness, unity without separation. Because potential energy doesn't exist, meaning there is no information and so no formation and so no awareness of being something. There's no consciousness. The unified field of potential energy, or mind, is the source of origin of all existence or manifestation of mind in the spiritual universe, and ultimately the physical one as well. Mind needs to develop a field of potential energy, an area of activity. The field remains unified because potential energy has no form. The unified field of potential energy, or mind, needs to develop information. Information can only come about through the creation of reference. Stateless wholeness is non-information. There is no thing to be aware of, and no consideration or thought exists. No information, and so no reference point. But mind's desire is to know its creative power, and so mind must produce information, must create a reference point. Information can only occur when there is something to know. Divine will is the desire of mind to know or have knowledge of its power. The unified field of potential energy wants to see what it is like, so to speak. It wants to be informed of its power so that it can express it. Divine will is therefore the literal source or origin of all information. Divine will is mind's first act of knowing, which then begins the process of having knowledge. Divine will acts on mind's desire to know its power, and so moves into action. The motion itself, impelled by the infinite impulses of divine desire, is an action that occurs within the unified field of potential energy. This motion is still at the pre-existent level, nothing has manifested yet, just the cause, the first cause. Mind's impelled first act, or will, the first cause, then compels will to create an effect. Thus, action causes reaction. Reaction is the result of a cause, and this reaction is also known as effect, and that will subsequently become a counter cause to another reaction, and so forth. The effect or reaction of mind's supraquantum motion, resulting in the movement of divine will, is the colliding of two chaotic impulses of infinite potential energy. Infinite possibility is about to become a defined possibility, or quite literally, the impossible is about to happen, about to become possible. Divine will moves so that infinite oneness, or the unseparated and absolute unity of dimensionlessness, as an infinity of impulse devoid of knowledge or information, the unified field, is disturbed. Divine will, as a minute force of supramotion of enormous power, influences the unified field of infinite potential energy by its supramotion. Motion means the act or process of moving or of changing position. The supramotion itself is an anomaly, and causes a separation from dimensionlessness to come about from the unified field, or mind. The motion itself causes a separation, a parting, or as it is better explained and understood, as a protrusion or projection of potential movement from the unified field. The supramotion of divine will itself sets up an inside and an outside within the unified field. There are thus two positions created, inside of the supramotion and outside of the supramotion, a within motion and a without motion. In the absence of any motion in the unified field, there is no within or without, as there is no dimension, and so complete uniformity of infinite impulse remains undisturbed or static. The point of divine will is at the cross-section of the self-created point of reference in relation to motion, the within and the without. This point is the origin of existence. The supramotion of divine will caused, and continuously causes, a distinction to be made in the dimensionless unified field of limitless potential energy. That distinction causes a separation from, or a protrusion from, the absoluteness of complete stillness or inertia, into a potential quantity in preparation for the creation of the first division, and thus the first number, as a definition of separateness, or as a protrusion from mind. This is still in the pre-existent state. Nothing has formed yet. Divine will, the incredibly small pre-activating pre-motion of mind, caused a singularity within the infinite impulse of potential energy to be caught or harnessed in its incredibly tiny supramotion. The incredibly small-scale pre-occurrence began the unleashing of the incredible big-scale power of potential energy or mind. Divine will, as the first pre-motion of mind, through its pre-motion, captured or harnessed a singular impulse from the infinity of impulse. The supramotion of divine will singled out one impulse from the infinity of impulse. All singularized impulses are identical. They are the same urge or the same infinite desire. This harnessing creates the first quantity of potential energy, and likewise the first number, the number 1. There was now such a thing as quantity, although that quantity has still not taken on form because it is still only an impulse of potential. But the impulse is now capable of being singular. It therefore has a precondition of possible separateness or protrusion outside the unified field of potential energy. Again, this next part may be difficult to grasp, but when fully understood, makes perfect sense, so I'll slow it down again. The harnessed impulse of divine desire in non-motion, that is, inert, is continuously inseparable from the unified field of infinite impulse or dimensionlessness. Infinite impulses can never separate from the unified field, as the unified field is infinite and unchangeable. The harnessed impulse remains identical to the unified field of potential energy. However, simultaneously, the singled out captured impulse caught in the minute supramotion of divine will was identified through the act of being singled out. The act of singling out a single infinite impulse so that it becomes identified through the motion of will creates a condition, the condition of identity. So the identified infinite impulse has two simultaneous circumstances. It has both unity and uniqueness. The correlating state of unity and of uniqueness as an identified infinite impulse means that there is now a reference point, a relative position between complete wholeness, unity with the unified field, or absolute sameness or oneness, and having been drawn into a unique identity within the unified field. Absolute oneness, the unified field or mind, through the motion of divine will, has caused a singleness, a uniqueness, which is a sub-form of absolute oneness or unity. Uniqueness cannot exist until there is a form of distinction within the field of sameness from the field of unity. Uniqueness comes from unity. A single one comes from the whole one and is thus a part of the whole one. As a more concrete example, a single page in a book is a part of the whole book. On its own, the single page is not a book, but it is an inseparable component of the book, as it is bound to it and part of it. Each single one of the pages of the book, when viewed collectively, forms the oneness of the object called a whole book. The single pages, when unified as a collection of pages, creates a single book. If you remove the pages, there is no book. If you remove the book, there are no pages. Mind is both unified and unique. It has both qualities. Mind's unity is the field of infinite potential energy and all that is created through it. And its uniqueness is that it is unparalleled. There is nothing else like it. Mind's infinite impulse of desire is both unified and capable of becoming unique. The supramotion of will affects the unified field, and this produces an effect. Mind's infinite desire is to create, to manifest its power, and so it has an eternal predisposition for this. Put simply, mind, by nature, is impelled to create energy so that it can use its potential power to identify its power, and mind's will is the means of bringing this into effect. So, the unified field of potential energy through the supraquantum motion of will has caught in its motion an uniquely identified infinite impulse of creativity. Creativity is being able to create through intuitiveness and being imaginative. Infinite impulses are infinitely creative, which means they are infinitely inventive and infinitely imaginative. The supramotion of divine will is about to cause an effect. It is about to cause thought to form. Mind is about to bring forth its ingenious ingenuity through the act of creative imagination. Imagining is the formation of thought. Why does mind need thought to form? So that mind can become informed and thus intelligent, active with information. It is only through information that mind can get to know its power by revealing its ability to create images of its power through projection. Yay! That is it for today. That took a while, but we got to number 7 in the process of thought, or the process of creation, or how God works. Stick around if you need this video content summed up, because I am going to do a summary of everything we've just gone through. The next video will be continuing on what has been left off here, and it could be the last video for this series on what is God. Unless I miss something, which I hope I haven't, or if I end up with a bunch of the same questions being asked about something, or if something needs further elaboration, then I'll do videos addressing those questions. But otherwise, we're doing well, I think. So to summarize, hopefully as quickly and efficiently as possible, everything we just spoke about takes place at a purely abstract level. A place which is no place, which is even beyond imagination, as imagination requires thought or structure, and here there is none. We just went from how mind stirs from complete inertia into an active state, or how potentiality becomes possibility. The possibility state is the state of pre-existence, or the establishment of the first cause, of which its effect begins or creates the first thought, which is the first effect, which is the beginning of creation, the beginning point of the universe, which is where the next video will continue on. We discussed desire and will, which are the preconditions of mind. Desire is pure potential energy, the infinite impulses of pure potentiality, which are all identically the same desire. The desire to become, the desire to know itself, or know its power. But it has nowhere to go, nothing to do, nowhere to act or move, as there is no dimension. It's requiring a force to fix this problem. Will is the force, which is the first cause, of which its effect, as I just said before, begins and creates everything starting as the first thought, and the first effect of the motion of will caused two impulses of potential energy or desire to fuse, or come together, or cross paths. Will establishes dimension, relativity, or point of reference through its supramotion, by distinguishing between 2 points of reference, or between 2 impulses of potentiality from the infinity of impulses, by isolating or capturing one, which makes it uniquely identifiable, which creates identity. There's now also quantity, the number 1, which can be distinguished because it is within the supramotion of will, and the other, and all others, is outside the supramotion of will. You have a within and without, inside, outside. You have a point of reference, relativity, identity, quantity. The effect of the motion of will caused 2 impulses to collide, which begins existence and the continuation of cause and effect. The supramotion of will is done purely by intuition, compelled by desire, which is mind's highest function, as there is no consciousness because it hasn't been made yet, and nothing else has been made yet because there is no condition or limitation made yet. There's nothing before the first cause. Mind intuits through the infinite impulses of potential energy or desire that there is potential power and desires to know this power, so will moves into action. The intuition from the desire results in will, or the first cause of motion. They are inseparable, the one thing. They all establish and are the first cause: will, intuition, and desire. Will is the more accurate reference to the first cause because of its supramotion within our limitations of thought and use of language, as you can't, for example, say, how long was desire or infinite potential impulses around before it could intuit and result in will? Or how long was mind just mind before it became something? How long was nothing nothing before it became something? Those questions themselves don't even make sense. You can't track time or points of reference or change or movement when none of these things are even possible or haven't been made yet. They don't exist. Before consciousness, there is no time or reference or movement. Hence why all this is very abstract, and why you can't know or perceive mind or nothingness. You can only form a concept of it, or once you have highly evolved spiritually, intuitively apprehend it, which still isn't the same as knowing. Another way I displayed this process was using the unified field diagram to represent mind. Obviously, it isn't accurate to represent this as a circle, as it is infinite nothingness, which has no boundary or shape or anything. But then again, nothing visually displayed here today is accurate because nothing we covered today can be perceived. It's all abstract. The unified field of infinite impulses of potentiality, or potential energy, or desire, intuits through the impulses that there is potential power and desires to know that power, which puts will in motion. The will to act or become, or to know the power, or God's desire to know its power or know itself, i.e. become self-aware or conscious, produce or create thought or formed energy. Will establishes, or is, the first cause, singles out a single potential impulse in its supramotion, which establishes identity, relativity, uniqueness, and all the rest. This is also the point from which everything emerged from or began, the point of pre-existence or pre-thought, pre-awareness, which is where mind, or the unified field, has stirred or awakened and become infinite possibility, at a point that protrudes from the unified field, or where potentiality becomes a shade less darker or slightly less intangible and becomes possibility. Important to remember though, this protrusion or point is not separate. Nothing is or can separate from mind. It's the source of everything and is everything. And the effect, or the first effect from the first cause, is thought, and the collision or crossing paths of two impulses of potentiality. I also used the seed, the pre-root cause, and tree of life example. Hopefully by now you can understand that one. It's like this. I'll put it on screen. I also used this representation at the start, intelligence, which is like a flow-on from intuition. I had the idea to put an additional outer circle as intuition, but I don't think that would do it justice. So, intelligence, form, knowledge, or information, i.e. the process of thought. How intelligence is the force, i.e. will, that collects potential thought, i.e. potential energy, into a field, bringing it under control and limiting it. Force creates control and order, which is form, which converts potential power to creative power. And remember, each impulse is infinitely creative and powerful, which then creates or forms knowledge. Also, additionally, because I think this is a good time to talk about this, Remember how in the last video I said all major religious traditions are the same? Meaning fundamentally they are all trying to teach, or they are all talking about the same thing. I don't just mean the major religious traditions of today. Ancient Egyptian, Greek, Persian, Mesopotamian. I've even seen in small tribal spiritualities, all have this in there, or in them. Like I said, all this that I'm talking about is nothing new. I'm just probably delivering it in a different way. In later videos, I'll be showing examples of this sameness of traditions. What can happen though, like I'll example here, using all these different examples, ways of putting it, or saying it, or representing it, is each example, method, or way can become a following, or its own religion, take up its own name, fuse with culture, become a scripture, or oral tradition, and so on. This basically happened with humans as time went on. People separated, moved, and changed, and so did the religions and ways of representation. They became culturally relevant, hence why, for example, the Bible doesn't have kangaroos in it, whereas Dreamtime mythology does, but their stories have the same representation, symbology, metaphor, allegory. There are also individuals throughout history that have had the realization to different degrees that then explain it and put it in their own words and ways of describing it, and then that catches on and becomes a following or a change within a tradition. So all this happens, and then if people join or take part in whichever religion and don't fully understand it, or misunderstand it, misinterpret it, or don't fully understand the other religion, and they interact with or talk with a seemingly different religious following or belief system, they can't see the unity or the sameness, or that they are both talking the same talk, just using different words, pictures, stories, etc. And it's worse if the person or people of the other religion explaining their religion also don't have the full understanding, and so also can't see the unity. The unity is easily missed if you don't understand, or if you don't correctly interpret, and whatever else. All this stuff is within humans. It's the story of humans and the universe. It's God. Even if hypothetically you obliviated, if that's even a word, all religious traditions from humanity, it would all still be there, as it is the universe or God, not the books or traditions. And it would all form again, just probably not word for word or story for story, but it would come about again. We can't help it. This stuff isn't just found in our religions. It's in and is each of us. It's in our art and creative works. Some do it better than others. It's in the movies we make, like The Lord of the Rings and many others. It's in old folk tales and fairy tales. It's in certain works of Disney. The battle between good and evil, and the growth of spiritual evolution of characters. It all represents this that I'm showing you. Science is just another method or way or language used to discover this same process or thing. It hasn't fully yet, it's on its way. In the end, it will be just another way or method of explaining or discovering God. And that's enough for this video. Please give this video a like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell, because I'm not able to upload these videos on regular basis or regular intervals. These take considerable time to prepare. This one took a while. And this is not my occupation, so I can't solely commit to making these videos. I can only commit to them in my spare time. And also share, not just on your social media. Send a video link to other people or channels that might have interest in this, or even those who may constructively challenge this. I'm open to opposing views. And also share amongst your friends, family, people you know, or your associated place of worship. Get out there and discuss ideas and listen to different opinions and figure out for yourself what God is and what you believe. And so, until the next video, or should need for me arise and call to me again, farewell, friends.